Welcome, everyone, to the Clean Water and Flood Resilience webinar as part of our Common Agenda education series. This webinar will be recorded and made available on our YouTube channel to be shared widely. We will answer any and all questions at the end of each sub-chapter section, so you can save your questions there in our Q&A chat. I'd also like to note that this is 501c3 and is intended as an education on strong conservation policy. We recognize that it's an election year, but for the purposes of our educational series, we are not engaging in conversations about specific or general legislation or bills. I'll be throwing it to Pat Calvert to facilitate the rest of our session.
Thanks, Adriana, and thanks everybody for being here. My name is Pat Calvert. I am your Director for Clean Water Land Conservation with Virginia Conservation Network. You have before you a smattering of co-authors of multiple briefing book papers that came out in an excellent annual document that we put out every year called Our Common Agenda. You can find it on our webpage, vcnva.org. These folks are going to describe, in brief, sort of provide some education behind some of these policy recommendations and background. And they're going to do so in fairly quick order, 3 or 4 minutes each. And then we'll save some time between each section. We'll have 3 different sections for about 10 minutes or so of Q&A. So if you have questions, and we hope you do, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, drop them in the questions, and then we'll ask after each section for our speakers to address those. Our first section is on clean rivers, creeks, and estuaries. The Chesapeake Bay has getting a lot of attention for the past, several decades. And we've got one on meeting wastewater upgrade, our obligations for wastewater, preventing polluted stormwater runoff, and enforcing water quality standards, and then also Q&A to follow that. So we would ask that you be thinking about your questions, drop them in the Q&A, and if they're directed to an individual speaker, maybe preface it with that in case, and if it's just broad and general, then we'll take whoever wants to take it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it right over to Patrick Fanning of Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Tell us about wastewater.
Thanks, Pat. Hi, everyone. This is one of my favorite topics, so excited to share with you our policy recommendations on the wastewater sector. This has been one of the success stories related to the Bay restoration movement and water quality improvements in the Commonwealth writ large, but there's more work left to be done. And so a few things that I wanted to mention to this group to provide a little background for our recommendations. First is that many of you are familiar with the successful wastewater treatment plant upgrades that have happened over the past decade or so that have led to the most significant nutrient reductions towards our Chesapeake Bay goals, and also the ones that are easiest to count. So you have usually one pipe at these facilities, and we know how many nutrients, how many pounds per year of these nutrients are going into our streams and tributaries. So they're easy to count. It's been a great success story, but there's still some work to be done. And during the 2021 Virginia General Assembly session, we had a long and hard-fought negotiation over some additional major wastewater treatment plants that have not yet upgraded, but had the potential to upgrade and the need to upgrade. And so there's a list now in state law of about 8 or 10 additional wastewater treatment plants that need to be upgraded for enhanced nutrient removal so that they're having far fewer nutrients reaching the Bay tributaries. So the flip side of that negotiation is that we now need to be in a position to support the funding from the Commonwealth to support those upgrades. So the numbers have evolved a little with our unique budget situation over this summer, but I think the current approach is that we'll need about $200 million each year during the next biennium to support wastewater treatment plant upgrades. And you know, like everywhere else in the economy, inflation is a big piece of that, and we've already seen at least one facility come back to the General Assembly and say, we saw the deadline that we had. The cost came in double what we anticipated them to be. So on the one hand, it is a big number, especially relative to some of the wastewater numbers in recent history, but it is important, and we know that like everywhere else, they're facing increased costs. Next, combined sewer systems. We're blessed with 3 combined sewer systems in the Commonwealth, and they are all moving toward resolving their issues. So combined sewer, stormwater, wastewater go in the same pipe, and during large storm events lead to overflows directly of mingled stormwater and sewage into our rivers and streams. Alexandria is well on its way to addressing and resolving their combined sewer system issues. They have a deadline of 2025. I recently actually had the opportunity to tour their storage facility that is a big pipe system that goes out into the Potomac River. But the city of Richmond is the biggest combined sewer system in Virginia, and also has a little bit more of a timeline imposed by the General Assembly to meet their obligations. So 2035 for the city of Richmond, and they're working on submitting their final plan for how they plan to address that issue. But the latest numbers we have are that it's going to cost over $1 billion. So there needs to be consistent support for those localities dealing with combined sewer systems. And then the last piece I want to touch on is I mentioned all the success of the wastewater sector over time, and it's been hundreds of millions of dollars that the Commonwealth has invested in upgrading these facilities. But there's a cost associated with running them every day, whether it's personnel or chemicals. And we want to make sure that those investments that the Commonwealth has made are being utilized to their fullest extent. So there's a pilot project that's been put on by DEQ to say, hey, if you run your facility as well as you can, and we understand there's an incremental cost to doing that. And so there's a program where those wastewater treatment plants can submit applications to DEQ to cover that little bit of delta. So a lot of work in wastewater, a lot of work left to be done, and look forward to answering any questions folks have. Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. And we're already getting some questions, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. If you want to follow along, whenever Dr. Zeus would come on, I would always want to follow along in the book. We have a book that goes along with today that goes way farther in depth on a lot of all the topics that we're going to discuss. Our streets, roads, rooftops all shed water. And Brent Hunsinger from Friends of the Rappahannock is here to tell us about curbing our polluted stormwater runoff. It's all yours.
All right, thank you, Pat. Like you said, my name is Brent Hunsinger. I'm with Friends of the Rappahannock. I am here today to speak with you all about preventing polluted stormwater runoff. First, I wanted to thank all the VCN folks for all the help that they do in wrangling all the organizations. It's a lot of work, and without them, we would not be nearly as effective as we have been as a community in supporting good environmental policy in Virginia. And then also I'd like to thank our co-authors who helped write this paper. So they're there, Blair Blanchette from the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts, Adam Gold from the Environmental Defense Fund, and Joe Wood from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So thank you to them. They all had integral parts in creating this paper as well over time. So it was not just myself. I am just the mouthpiece today. So stormwater. Stormwater runoff is, let me see, I gotta try and move along my. Is that not working? Cannot advance the slide.
If you want to start, we can
Anyway,
try to post it.
Yeah, so stormwater currently, so stormwater is basically that rainwater precipitation that hits the ground and runs off and runs somewhere, hence stormwater runoff. Stormwater is the fastest growing source of pollution to our waterways and is the main reason that many of our urban streams are impaired in Virginia.
There you go.
Sure why that is. It is not allowing. There we go. Okay. Apologies. All right. So we have it. Apologize for the technical difficulties. Stormwater runoff is the fastest growing source of pollution in our waterways and is the main reason our urban streams are impaired. It is the fastest growing sector of pollution. Agriculture is going down. Wastewater is going down. But stormwater is continuing as development happens over time. Significant development pressures are resulting in large increases of something called impervious surfaces. An impervious surface is a fancy word that says we create surfaces that when the water hits the ground, it does not soak into the ground and filter through into our streams through groundwater or some other way. It is a surface that where the water runs directly. So it could be a road, it could be a rooftop of some kind. There are many different impervious surfaces. So the water hits and runs into our creeks, and that has several issues with that. It can be super hot. It can create flashiness in your streams, and it can carry all the pollutants that have been building up over time on those surfaces and wash them directly into our creeks. Summertime or wintertime, all the salts that build up as well, and all those things that drip kind of get taken into your waterways and impact that. And this is important because Virginians rely on our waterways for drinking, among other things, many things, for drinking water and also for economic dependence on many different sectors of our economy. And I will say the quote they asked us, "Water is life." So with stormwater runoff, as they said, it is kind of a continuing to be a problem and growing over time in our urban areas and in our suburban areas. There are several policy solutions that we have put forward. The first one is $80 million each year. We would ask that from the general fund be allocated to the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, otherwise known as SLAF. SLAF is a state and local matching grant program that protects and improves the health of our waterways by helping fund local stormwater projects. So when towns and other localities need help dealing with their stormwater, they can go to this fund and apply for funding to help pay for some of these really expensive yet very much so needed projects to help get that water in the ground and clean it before it gets to your waterways. We're asking for $80 million. $80 million is needed to meet the requirements of that program. In 2023, there was $25 million allocated, and my understanding is for 2024, as of now, no money is allocated for SLAF. We hope that will change, but you can see that there are big differences in how much we have for needs and how much has been allocated. So we're advocating for increases in that funding to help our localities meet their local water quality goals on time as we approach 2025. Next on our list is $4 million for the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, otherwise known as VCAP. VCAP is an urban cost share program facilitated by our local soil and water conservation districts that provides financial incentives and technical and educational assistance to commercial and residential property owners to install eligible best management practices This funding program is for existing development. It is not for new construction. It's for older construction that are having problems with erosion and stormwater. These practices are such as rain gardens, conservation landscaping, and more engineered solutions such as vegetated swales and other things. And this kind of provides an ideal way for homeowners to invest in their properties, but also to support water quality goals, habitat goals, as well as deal with the impervious surfaces and promote flood and economic resilience in some areas. The final piece of something that we are also dealing with in a little different vein, it's not a funding program, is there has been an issue arising over time where some homeowners in neighborhoods that have HOAs have wanted to remove turf grass and other kind of plantings in their yards to install what we call low impact landscaping, which might be native plant gardens and pollinator friendly gardens, etc. But they have been prevented from doing so by covenants and laws at the HOA level. And so going forward, members are hoping to work with the General Assembly this year to try and remove limitations or restrictions on low impact landscaping that have been imposed by some property associations. Currently, Virginia code allows some property associations to require the use of turf grass. So for example, they could require you to have 75% of your yard in turf grass, which, probably we would like to have people that have the ability to decide what is best for their yards in that. That is it for stormwater. Glad to take people's questions. Thank you for bearing with me with my technical difficulties.
You've got a question, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. And we're gonna questions are coming to us. We're just kind of going through making sure that they're appropriate questions, and so far all of them coming through. Thank you, are appropriate and have been put up right after our next presentation from Dave Sligh of Wild Virginia on something. This is a new paper for VCN addressing something that's been on the minds for a long time, but it's enforcing water quality standards, state water quality standards. Dave, it's all you.
Thanks, Pat. While I try to get my slides going here. I am Dave Sligh, Conservation Director at Wild Virginia. Don't know why I can't get this going here. I'm just as bad as everybody else. Anyway, water quality standards are a bedrock of our protection efforts through regulation under the Clean Water Act and state law. Guys, I can't get it together here.
Go all the way to the left, play from the start.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. My co-author on this is Mark Frondorf, Shenandoah Riverkeeper. Appreciate his partnership on this. Water quality standards are supposed to define what our waters can be used for, how they can be maintained in a sustainable way. And so, like I say, they're kind of a basic that a lot of our regulatory system is rests on. We do have things called numeric criteria that give us a quantitative measure of what good water quality is supposed to be and look like, and they are applied on a routine basis through permitting and that kind of thing. We also have something called narrative criteria because we simply can't have numeric criteria for everything. With the thousands of chemicals and the many difficulties of setting quantitative numbers through standards, it's necessary to have these narrative descriptions of what good water quality is. Those are just as enforceable, and it's just as necessary to implement those fully as it is the numeric criteria. But the problem is they have not been fully implemented by DEQ and the State Water Control Board for quite a few years now. And I have plenty of illustrations of that. What should happen whenever somebody proposes a discharge? is that there should be an assessment to see whether those narrative criteria will be met under the kind of treatment regime they have. Here's an example that's been around to my personal knowledge for more than 40 years, where a paper plant discharges to a stream and causes that kind of problem. And that is clearly a violation of narrative water quality criteria because it makes the stream not usable the way it should be. There has not in the past, the many iterations of this permit, there has not been the kind of assessment up front to ensure this won't happen. And so that's one of the things that needs to happen with each permit that's issued. Then once the permit's issued, even if with our best estimates of how the limits and requirements will act, if it turns out that standards aren't met still, the permit should have a provision that says we can enforce that the standards themselves and that narrative criteria is part of the permit requirement. We also should have the kind of every 2 years when we do our water quality assessments, it should be part of the process that problems like this and other problems caused that violate narrative criteria should be put on our impaired water bodies list, because that starts a chain of events that then allows us to fix those problems. And then finally, because one of the deficiencies that exist is that we don't have adequate numeric nutrient criteria, it's necessary for us to pay more attention to, do more sampling and testing to find where harmful algal blooms are happening across the state. So that is another policy proposal we have. And that's me. And I thought I'd give you a nice picture where I want to be versus the previous one. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate it, everybody. We've got about 5 minutes for a little Q&A, and I'm just going to go down the list. Patrick, I believe this first one was directed to you. It's how is Henrico County doing in reference, presumably to the well, I'm going to leave that to you. I think this is about combined sewer overflow, but they had a referendum to approve money for upgrades.
Yep, thanks, Pat, and thanks for the question. So Henrico County was not included among the localities that are subject to the 2021 legislation that I mentioned. We fought really hard to get them included, but we were unsuccessful in getting them included. Of course, nothing prevents them from voluntarily taking on a wastewater treatment plant upgrade, but they are not on the list. Some of you may have also seen in the news over the past 2 years or so that Chesapeake Bay Foundation in partnership, and I apologize, I should have mentioned my co-author on this paper, Tom Dunlap with the James River Association, and along with the Environmental Integrity Project, we actually sued Henrico County over issues they were having at their wastewater treatment plant and with what we call their collection system, which is the hundreds of miles of pipes that feed all of our wastewater to the treatment plants. And we settled that lawsuit, and the county committed to making improvements at its facility to prevent violations of their permit, but they have not moved toward upgrading their facilities so that they would have the enhanced nutrient removal that many of the wastewater treatment plants in Virginia have already upgraded to.
So we only have a couple minutes left. I thank you for that, Patrick. And we've got a lot of great questions in here. So I can guarantee you we're not going to get to them all, but I hope that folks will reach out. Hosts, you can reach out to these folks in the Q&A directly and to help them answer their questions later. I think an important one in here right up front, though, from Cindy is, can homeowners apply for funding for Virginia Conservation Assistance Program? Brent, you want to take it?
Yes, they can. You have to go to your local stormwater conservation district office. Not all offices participate in VCAP. They have the choice to do so. but contact your local district and talk to them about VCAP. And if they do, you have the right to have them come out and do a site visit. You don't have the right to necessarily apply. You have to qualify to apply for certain practices, but contact them and they will be able to help you. Or if they don't, please ask them nicely to participate.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah. Short and sweet. Thanks. Reach out to your soil and water district. I want to thank all of our folks who presented. We're going to move on to our next section. We'll do the same sort of round. This is with short presentations and then a little Q&A at the end. And we'll try to, I'm going to try to stick to our time as best we can. If you want to reach out to any of these folks afterwards, thank you, Patrick. He dropped his information, or Adriana dropped Patrick's information, contact info into the chat there. Any other folks, well, if you had questions, feel free to do the same or reach out directly to the Inquirer. Next is our plastic and toxics suite of papers, I suppose. There's a lot of companies speculating on metals mining in Virginia and things that we're not really prepared for nor have really dealt with in the past. And then we've got an onslaught of plastic you may have heard of, and some false solutions, but also some real solutions. So Elly Wilson from Environment Virginia is going to cover both of those for us. And then finally, Jackie Goodrum of Wild Virginia is going to tell us about something that we hear about all the time, forever chemicals, PFAS. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it right over to Jessica Sims, who I believe is with Appalachian Voices, and also, if my memory serves me right, VCN's Conservation Champion of 2023. It's all yours.
Oh, thanks, Pat. So happy to be here. Thanks to VCN for this forum to learn, and to the fellow authors of the Preventing Harms from Metals Mining page this year. That's Stephanie Rinaldi of Friends of Buckingham and Patrick Fanning of Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So some of this information may be repeat for y'all in the audience, but wanted to bring us to another extractive issue, an extractive industry that threatens Virginia, and that's large-scale metals mining. This is both an old and new issue for Virginia. Gold, copper, zinc, and lead have had mining occur here in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Those smaller scale mines now sit by the hundreds, abandoned, unreclaimed, and environmentally hazardous. They're along what is called the Gold Pyrite Belt, which is a geologic structure extending from Fairfax down to Halifax County, with a concentration in Central Virginia and Buckingham. Where are we now? A large-scale version of this toxic industry is moving forward, or attempting to, while we have no comprehensive regulatory framework for large-scale mining. We have insufficient financial assurances, and this puts public health and drinking water at risk. Junior mining companies, or prospecting companies, have been prospecting near Virginia's Gold Pyrite Belt for several years and doing exploratory drilling and announcing, quote, high-grade findings. But our current mineral mining regulations are not designed to address that scale of industrial base and precious metals mining. They focus currently on the majority of active non-metals mining permits. That means sand, gravel, stone aggregates. This is what attracted the junior mining or prospecting companies to Virginia, that we do not have regulations in place for large-scale mining. This is especially concerning as it relates to water, because the surface drinking water systems for 3.2 million people are downstream of the Gold Pyrite Belt. The belt itself crosses the James River, which we know provides drinking water for millions, brings millions into our economy from commercial fishing and tourism, and attracts over 6 million visitors annually. Another challenge to this potential industry, it is incredibly land intensive, and it's a very toxic polluter. In fact, it's the nation's #1 toxic pollution source and can use cyanide in its processing of ore. It can result in perpetual acid mine drainage, catastrophic waste, destruction of cultural heritage in the areas where it's built, and can negatively impact local economies because it's a boom and bust type of industry. We have made progress on this issue. A 2021 bill required the study of the effects of gold mining on the Commonwealth and an assessment. But as I said before, the assessment of current regulations really hasn't gotten going yet. The entity that did the study, the National Academy of Sciences, highlighted significant concerns about the lack of regulations and protections, and specifically the threat of cyanide contamination from the processing of gold ore. So I'm focusing mostly on gold, but these are processes we need to look at for some of the other metals along the belt, copper, zinc, and lead, because we know prospecting companies are looking at multiple counties in Virginia for those too. Proposed legislation last year, or last General Assembly cycle, addressed the specific threat of cyanide contamination. It found bipartisan support, which was great, made it out of committee, but it did not advance from the General Assembly. So where does that leave us for the next steps in looking at and preparing and fighting this issue? With the junior mining companies, specifically Aston Bay, leasing private land in multiple places in Virginia and publicly communicating they are increasing funding to support these projects, this is a growing threat to our water. Policy solutions are needed to protect the environment and our health. And this is for thinking about these things in the short term and the long term. Some of the policy solutions that we've come up with are for the Virginia Department of Energy to be directed to pause the issuance of any permits for large-scale gold, copper, zinc, and lead mining until that regulatory framework is in place. For the Department of Energy and the Department of Environmental Quality to take a look at those regulations and existing bonding, reclamation, closure, and monitoring regulations to see if they would be sufficient and to start that process, a process that would ultimately be more protective of our health. In the immediate, we can ban the use of cyanide in all metals mining processes. It's not required, and it is extremely dangerous and would be catastrophic to the James River should a contamination event occur. We can also ask for more eyes on this issue and request or require that the Department of Energy study and assess mining impacts of copper, zinc, and lead. So thanks for listening to this issue.
Thanks, Jess, and congratulations on your well-deserved award. For the next two papers, Elly Boehmer Wilson is here to join us. Environment Virginia and her our co-authors have been working on this issue of waste and plastics and meaningful alternatives that are non-polluting for some time. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it right over to her.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pat. Okay, I just want to make sure the slides were working. So this paper is the Reducing Plastics, Litter, and Marine Debris paper. I want to thank Zach Huntington with Clean Virginia Waterways for helping me put this together, as well as the entire VCN Plastics Work Group, who's really been a collaborative effort to come up with this vision for how we're going to deal with plastics in Virginia. So you can go to the next slide. Plastic pollution is one of the water issues that is the most visible to the eye. I think we have all seen plastic polluted in our communities, in our waterways, and it has a serious impact on our health, as well as the health of wildlife and the wild places that we all love so much. It's really important to remember that the majority of the plastic that is in the ocean, in those big giant ocean patches of plastic, they come from on-land sources. So this is an issue that we need to address all across the state of Virginia. And the production and use of plastics really is what's standing in our way. We use so much plastic in everything that we use, but we don't really have great ways of actually managing it. And that's partially because of the chemical makeup of it, but it's also because of the material. It's lightweight, flimsy. It's just so much more likely to end up as litter. And the issue with this, kind of to that chemical component of it, is that producers aren't required to really think about, can this actually be recycled in Virginia if we're going to sell it there? And for the most part, they can't be. Only 9% of plastic is actually recycled. And so that's an incredible amount that either ends up landfilled, incinerated, or in our environment. So we can go to the next slide. So for our solutions, the first one is in the category of, we need to just get rid of the worst stuff. Polystyrene, expanded polystyrene, particular single-use expanded polystyrene, or what many people know as styrofoam, is one of the worst types of single-use plastics. So we passed a ban on single-use foam takeout containers and cups in the 2021 General Assembly. And then the following year, it was placed on a 5-year delay from where it was actually going to be enacted. So a little confusing, but basically it's the longest enactment of a foam ban ever. So this wouldn't actually go into effect until 2028, and that is a very long time, especially for these really large establishments. And so we want to get that phase out back on schedule a little bit. It was supposed to start this year. So we would like to have that start in 2024. The next one is about having producers take responsibility for the products that they make. So by having them be a part of the whole process from making the product to actually disposing of it, we're going to be incentivizing them to use sustainable materials that use less in general, but also actually contribute to the recycling and management of the materials that we do end up using. We would increase the litter tax to align with inflation and adjust every 5 years. Our litter tax helps fund a lot of the work to actually clean up the litter that is in our waterways. And we are really just not funding it nearly as much as we should be. So we should be adjusting that, as other states across the country have done. And then the last recommendation is $3 million for Virginia's abandoned and derelict vessel prevention and removal program. That is an issue that is in our water currently, and we can spend the money to get those abandoned and derelict vessels out and keep our ocean clean that way. And we also have this image on here just to show you so many Virginians support these, and I think that's really important. The first couple are all producer responsibility type bills. So that is a Clean Virginia Waterways study on voter support of these policies. So we can go to the next slide and we'll get into some false solutions. So I just mentioned all the things we really should be doing. Well, the plastics industry oftentimes has a different idea of what we can do to reduce plastic pollution. And the thing is oftentimes those ideas don't actually reduce plastic pollution. So I'll get a little bit into this, particularly around chemical recycling or plastics to fuel. So you can go to the next slide there. And then this is actually an image of chemical conversion, chemical recycling, plastics to fuel. All these phrases are used to describe this as the what the plastics industry is kind of advertising as the savior to the plastic pollution crisis. And so just to kind of tell you what it does is it actually is an umbrella term for a lot of different types of technologies. And the end result of those technologies are 3 different things. It's either fuel that's burned for energy right there, downgraded plastic, or chemicals then used as additives for different types of fuel. So you can go to the next slide. So what's wrong with all that? Well, it doesn't recycle very much. So little of the plastic that actually goes in there results in downgraded plastic. Now, we don't want downgraded plastic to begin with. That's not really a circular economy, but it doesn't even just make the linear economy a little longer. Downgraded plastic is not where we want to go, and it actually doesn't do very much of it. Only 1 to 14% of the plastic that is advanced recycled or chemically recycled is turned into downgraded plastic. And then the next few things is really about the amount of pollution involved with it. I think it's really important to note that it is just basically a really expensive and polluting way to burn more fossil fuels. The plastic that goes through the process and is turned into fuel, it's an expensive process. The process itself has environmental impacts, but if we're trying to protect our environment, we should not be taking plastic and then taking it through a really long process, just to burn it for jet fuel. That is contributing to climate change, and it's just increasing our demand for more plastic. It's actually 10 to 100 times more environmentally and economically beneficial to just use virgin plastic over it going through this process. And again, it takes money from real solutions. It's really expensive. And this industry is asking Virginia for more and more money to try it out here. We already know what works, and we should be focusing on those solutions. So you can go to the next slide, and I'll go through how we can kind of deal with chemical recycling. We should clarify that this isn't recycling, and it should be regulated with applicable solid waste and energy laws, particularly if it's burned for energy. We should prevent the proven solutions that I mentioned before. I won't get into all of them. We should make sure that we are protecting environmental justice communities. These types of facilities oftentimes end up in environmental justice communities and have a disproportional impact on them, whether it's the actual advanced recycling facilities or the incinerators where they go to burn for energy eventually. And then taxpayer money should not be going to recruit or retain this industry in Virginia. So I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of this section.
Very good, Elly. Thank you so much. And to finish out this section on plastics and toxics is Jackie Goodrum with Wild Virginia. All yours.
Thanks, Pat. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Great. So our paper, Stopping PFAS Pollution at its Source, is technically a new topic for VCN this year for our common agenda. However, PFAS pollution itself is not new. It has been going on for decades, and we are only just now finding out the extent of contamination. Before I get into that, I also want to thank my co-authors, Carol Courtney at the Southern Environmental Law Center, Betsy Nicholas, who is on this webinar from Potomac Riverkeeper Network, and Barbara Walsh from Rockbridge Conservancy. So the problem, PFAS are toxic human-made chemicals that threaten public health and the environment. They have been discharged into our waters for decades now by industrial users, manufacturers, and wastewater treatment plants. Thus, our waters in Virginia, our surface waters, groundwater, and drinking water is contaminated with PFAS. We know this from scientific studies that have been done, including studies by the Department of Environmental Quality and the Virginia Department of Health. This is concerning because PFAS, even in low levels, has harmful impacts on human health and on the health of wildlife. Both scientific studies in humans and animals have shown that exposure to PFAS results in higher rates of cancers, liver disease, obesity, high cholesterol, reproductive issues, developmental issues, among other concerns. And so this is not something that we want in our waters, certainly not in our drinking water. PFAS are persistent, meaning that they linger in the environment, and this is why they've earned that name forever chemicals. So even if a discharge occurred decades ago, it's still hanging around in our water. PFAS are also bioaccumulative, meaning that they build up in our cells. And they're also mobile, meaning that they can move easily within water and air. And currently, PFAS discharges continue unabated, and current technology, filtration technology at wastewater treatment plants is inadequate to filter PFAS out of our water. And so while I've been talking a lot about we have PFAS in our drinking water, we have PFAS in our surface water and our groundwater, it's important, while the drinking water component is important, the only way to truly solve this problem is to stop the discharges at their source. And fortunately, we have, can you go to the next slide? Sorry, yep. We have a tool for that. The Federal Clean Water Act enables Virginia to set pollution discharge limits on pollutants, including PFAS, because under our state's general criteria, facilities are not authorized to discharge unabated without limits pollutants that are harmful to human health. And PFAS, we know, we have the data, we have the scientific studies, is harmful to human health. So our primary policy solution this session this year is to encourage and influence the Department of Environmental Quality to stop PFAS pollution at its source by requiring industrial dischargers to disclose and control their discharges through our existing wastewater permit and pre-treatment programs. It's fortunate that we have such strong legal authority to support this approach, but we also hope that there will be the administrative willpower to actually make this happen. And that's why it is our primary focus this year, is finding ways to influence the agency to do the job that it needs to do, because as my colleague said earlier, they don't always do that. Additionally, one of the excuses that we often get with DEQ on why they can't do certain things is inadequate funding. And with an issue like this, we seek to also provide sufficient funding to the agency to be able to identify and effectively eliminate pathways of PFAS pollution, whether that's hiring more staff so that they have people who can go around and do the checks and reports that need doing, or also expanding the testing sampling program that has been going on for the past 2 years. Presently, DEQ has only tested surface waters in, I believe, 68 locations, which is insufficient in giving us a true picture of the extent of contamination throughout our state. VDH conducted a phase 1 drinking water study in 2021, and they are currently in the process of wrapping up a phase 2 study that will come out by the end of the year that will show a much wider picture of what PFAS contamination looks like in drinking water in our state, as they sampled almost 300 sites. And so part of what we need in order to solve this problem is to know where exactly we should be targeting, which facilities need to be tracked, and definitely have permit limits put in sooner rather than later. So thank you for hearing my presentation on this issue, and feel free to put any questions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Jackie. Thanks, everybody. Jasmine's put in a couple of questions, and Jess, I'm going to go ahead and hand this one to you on the use of cyanide in metal mining. Why exactly is it being used in metal mining processing? In other words, what added benefit is being gained by the companies using it to metal mine if it isn't necessary?
It's one potential way to process and pull the gold. It's possibly a cheaper way, and that's why people have looked to that. But it's certainly one of the most toxic, and so that's the concern. So they don't have to use it; they're choosing to use it. Alternatives can be found with sulfate compounds or flotation procedures that are another way to gold mine in the large scale capacity.
Thanks, Jess. And Jasmine continued for a question for, looks like, Elly and Jackie. Plastic alternatives made from other materials such as bioplastics. How suitable are these, or how sustainable are these, and how safe are they for people in the environment?
I am happy to give my take on that. I think the biggest thing when it comes to reducing plastic pollution is that we need to reduce plastic usage first. So we need to find ways to design products in a smart way that we are not wasting such an incredible amount. The issue with bioplastics is going to be a lot the same with regular plastics due to them being lightweight, flimsy, and overabundant. So if we don't address those other things, we're just going to have a lot of these in our environment. And those don't actually break down under just regular everyday conditions right away. So that's still impacts our wildlife, and that is a major concern. So while they might not be fossil fuels breaking down into microplastics into our environment, they still, unless we have like composting across Virginia and it's done correctly and things like that, they still present the same issues. And so before we even look at that type of stuff, we really need to start designing our products smarter and focusing on the reducing and the reusing aspects before trying to come up with a different type of plastic.
Additionally, from the PFAS perspective, a lot of these bioplastics and products are coated with a water-resistant liner that contains PFAS in it. And so, like Elly was saying, we really need to focus on the bigger design picture of finding, redesigning these whole processes and coming up with better materials, or just using different materials that we already have, like metal or glass, that wouldn't have those types of linings in them.
Great. If you got more questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we'll come back to we can always come back to them, or folks can answer those speakers in written format. But I always like to talk about it a little more interactive. So thank our speakers. We've got 2 more speakers on 2 more papers left. These are on big issues that are not going away anytime soon. Flood resilience, and making certain that Virginia is ready to our communities are ready to deal with, prepared to deal with the impacts of climate change. And then with a recent Supreme Court decision, Virginia's wetlands could be placed at some undue risk. So without further ado, for advancing equitable statewide flood planning, I'm going to hand it over to Mary-Carson Stiff of Wetlands Watch.
Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon. So I am going to provide a very brief overview of the paper that Pat mentioned. The co-authors of this paper are Morgan Butler from the Southern Environmental Law Center, Jay Ford from Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Emily Steinhilber from the Environmental Defense Fund, and then me from Wetlands Watch. So thanks for doing all this work to my co-authors. So I'm going to talk about challenges, and the kind of pull-out quote here is, within 60 years, nearly 1 million Virginians will be at risk of major coastal flooding. The challenges of this enormous problem of flood and climate resiliency are overwhelming. They are breathtaking, and they feel nearly impossible. And so I just want to come out the gate with these challenges are immense, and our solutions are not going to solve the challenge. They're going to help us live with the challenge and hopefully work towards, like, not crippling our economy and engaging as society kind of as we know it. So just out of the gate, wanted to make sure this is definitely understood. We're going to try to kind of summarize the challenge as we're experiencing it today. So this issue is cross-sectional. It touches every single sector of our society. And this would include health, safety, the economic health, not only human health, our environmental health, our social fabric. This challenge touches absolutely everything, as is always the truth with our environmental challenges. Unfortunately, this challenge is difficult for our governments to wrap their minds around and wrap their programs around. And so right now in Virginia, we're really lacking the statewide coordination across agencies and with big players that go beyond just state agencies, right? So the business sector, for example, local governments, which are integral to the execution of state agency programs and planning. So we just don't really have good coordination. Our groups are not always talking to each other, and this is presenting a challenge in rolling out good solutions and good policy for this issue. This is the obvious one. There is just not enough money, and maybe less understood, but equally as important, there's not enough capacity anywhere at all levels of government, at all different program areas. This is even true for our NGO community, to develop the needed solutions and the needed kind of strategies to help us manage the challenges and the impacts of climate change. And then reducing flood risk, because this is the flood planning policy paper, and it's important to note that we're struggling to have enough money and enough capacity to just reduce flooding baseline. So we need to build up resources and build up expertise and time for staff people to work on these issues. Okay, so for policy solutions, this is what we've come up with. So far, this is a snapshot of where we are in Virginia right now. What we know most importantly is that we need equitable and comprehensive approaches to flood resilience. And we need this because we need to help protect our people, our communities, our economy, and our natural resources. So this is what we've proposed. We need no less than $200 million in general funds to go to the state grant program available for local governments, entities, and it was tribal communities until this most recent round, to create capacity to plan and to implement projects that reduce flood risk. This grant program is called the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, and it is the only investment that the state has made in flood risk pre-disaster planning. It's important to note that the community flood preparedness resources are coming out of Virginia's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI. 45% of each auction goes towards funding this grant program. And for the first time, the grant program also includes loans, and there's a new loan program. We're going to talk about that in a second. So right now, the Community Flood Preparedness Fund has awarded $98 million to flood risk reduction, capacity building, planning, and projects. And the Community Flood Preparedness Fund writ large, which goes to fund state activities in this space, has received $328 million so far from the General Assembly, or excuse me, from the RGGI proceeds. So there's a lot of activity in getting Virginia out of RGGI, as we all know, and we're upset about this, and we don't want this to happen. But we need to be prepared for the potential for it to happen. So if Virginia pulls out of RGGI, we need general funding to go towards the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. Not only do we need general funding because there'll be no RGGI money going into the fund, but we need general funds because the RGGI allocation is a drop in the bucket compared to what we need on the ground to be invested in flood risk reduction in our communities. And this is statewide. Okay, so let's stop for a second about funding and talk about Chief Resilience Officer. We need a standalone CRO who can function across agencies and help coordinate all of the many actions that are at play, in addition to the many funding resources that are at play. And we believe that no less than 6 full-time employees should go with this CRO. So building up our state's capacity is the only way we're going to be able to address the challenges ahead. We also have proposed that there should be a real project prioritization process that is linked to our state's flood risk planning and our funding programs. So right now, the state doesn't want to prioritize funding because the process by which to receive eligible projects hasn't happened equitably. And we certainly don't want to put the cart before the horse, but we do need our state to take some direction and to provide some direction for which projects are going to receive money because they fit into this larger plan that we all understand the reasons why, and it's been vetted and all that stuff. Now, in our state funding programs, there has been an effort to create transparency, releasing specific information about projects and scoring and things like that. But what's unusual is that there really isn't a comparable funding source that has the same amount of money in it. Again, we're talking over $300 million. In the state that doesn't have some sort of oversight board or decision-making body. This Community Flood Preparedness Fund that has all this money in it, there's there's nobody saying, okay, well, I've checked this decimal and I know that this money has gone to this source other than VRA, who's in charge of administering the grants. It's important that we have good governance attached to a really important funding resource. And we're just feeling really strongly that there should be some real commitments codified in law. Similarly, there is a provision that requires that Community Flood Preparedness Fund money sets aside 25% of those resources for under-resourced communities. So this is good. We want the communities that need the most help should have some preferential treatment for getting help. And we would like to see a new funding program that's been established, the Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund, which is primarily used for loans for private, for property level protections. We'd like to see that this new fund have the same set aside for under-resourced communities. So communities, local governments, they're on the front lines of this climate change problem, and we need to make sure we can support those communities the best that we can. And this 25% set aside is a really good way to make sure resources are where they need to be. The revolving program, if you aren't aware, received $100 million in the most recent budget from general funds, and we think that it's great. We need as many buckets of money as we possibly can, but right now our local communities, they're really using grants more. Loans require a specific level of sophistication and resource management that is just not where most communities are, with all of the capacity and staff constraints that we all know communities are experiencing. Finally, we think that in Virginia, we should be prioritizing voluntary relocations and natural floodplain restoration. And doing them at the same time is the best way to get the biggest bang for your buck. And we think that this is critical as our shoreline begins to encroach landward with sea level rise. We need to be ahead of the game as much as possible. And this is really important for our natural resources to be able to migrate landward, because without the migration of our shoreline and wetlands moving landward with sea level rise, we're looking at 89% wetlands loss by 2080. So it's pretty serious, and the more we can do to get people out of the way to allow our wetlands to move upland, the better off we'll be for all of those ecosystem services that we love so much about wetlands, and Betsy's going to talk about. Okay, I've got some sticky stuff with my advancing of slides, so it's just my contact information. There you go. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary-Carson. And I think I don't even need to step in here because she already smoothly transitioned with the wetlands right over to Betsy. So Betsy with Potomac Riverkeeper Network.
Please kick me off the share. I can't exit it for some reason.
We shall kick.
I hope you can.
All right, now let me see if I can get mine up. Wonder why it's being cranky. All right, there it is. Okay, so as Mary just teed up nicely for you, wetlands, pretty important for Virginia for a multitude of reasons. And even without what the Supreme Court did, we are at risk of losing, I'm going to say it again, even though she said it, 89% of the tidal wetlands in Virginia by 2080. I'll probably be dead, but some of you might still be alive for that. And certainly for future generations, your children, you need wetlands. I did not follow the template, sorry, so mine looks slightly different. But I want to thank our co-authors on this. And mine also doesn't want to advance. Apparently this is a problem shared amongst many of us today. Well, I can do it without my slides if need be here. So just thanking my co-authors on this paper, Jay Ford from Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Mary-Carson Stiff from Wetlands Watch, and Mark Sabbath from Southern Environmental Law Center. If anyone knows how to make this thing start advancing, I'm all ears. Ooh, there we go. Somebody's fabulous. So wetlands, extremely important for a multitude of reasons, from being a tremendous carbon sink to being our buffers against storm surge, flooding, etc. The Supreme Court, in keeping with what it has been doing recently, basically ruining our lives decision by decision, has thrown away 50 years of precedence on the nice broad interpretation of what are considered waters of the United States, including wetlands, something that was specifically clarified in the past by Congress when the courts were kind of batting it back and forth, that wetlands were supposed to be included in that definition and receive protection under the Federal Clean Water Act. This decision leaves about 70% of the nation's rivers and streams no longer under federal protection, and leaving us so that we just have to deal with state level protections. Next slide. Whoever's the fabulous person doing this. I think that's Pat. Yes, okay. So waters of the US is the basis of all of this, and what was in law considered navigable waters was greatly expanded, and that's the definition we've been using, and has allowed federal law as implemented down through the states, which most of the states implement the Clean Water Act, to give that authority to protect not just your sort of traditional where you can operate boats down it, but the streams and creeks, and then wet areas that adjoin all of them and make them move. So the Supreme Court decided, we don't care about that. Wetlands, who needs them? I have extra information in here for anyone who really feels like reading about the history of this case. But basically it was developers who wanted to build. There was a wetland, they filled it in and built. That's kind of the way these things go. Normally that would be considered illegal, but no. But Virginia, yay, Virginia on something, has a much more expansive protection. In fact, Virginia's waters of the state definition is as broad as the waters of the United States definition used to be. Virginia also has a policy that's very important that says no net loss of wetlands. Now, that's through things that the state can permit, right? That doesn't control the loss that we have through sea level rise. So we're still going to have net losses, even if we maintain the no net loss. We have several concerns here, though, of we can't just say like, oh, Virginia's got it protected, we're good, and we can move on. Because currently for wetlands permitting and actions, Virginia depends exclusively on the Army Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers, of course, follows federal law, and thus they now have this extremely narrow determination of which wetlands are covered under the law. So we have a gap here of, okay, so who's dealing with all of these wetlands and waterways that aren't covered under federal law? And that's where we're going to need some help. Additionally, there are many groups out there, developers, etc., who are interested in changing Virginia's current definition of waters of the state to narrow it down to the federal floor. We already have half the states in the country who are just using that. So the minute the Supreme Court made that decision, they lost their protections. We have this state level protection, but there are a lot of folks out there who are interested in changing it just for short-term gains. And we're going to need to be prepared to fight that. But regardless of those, we still don't have any right for third-party enforcement for these waters that are no longer covered, waters including wetlands, that are no longer covered under the federal law, that are just covered under state law. So that means the type of actions that Riverkeepers and Chesapeake Bay Foundation and Wetlands Watch and many bring on behalf of the communities to enforce the law. We don't have the right to do that in Virginia for all of these waterways that are no longer covered. What we need to do, we need to be educating lawmakers on this about the importance of keeping Virginia's strong definition of waters of the state. Saying things like federal consistency, that sounds good, right? That sounds efficient, but it is not. It would lose protections that the state has made a point of saying that they go beyond, that they need this state level protection. With Virginia's current risk on flooding and sea level rise, it is all the more essential that we maintain this broad definition of waters of the state of Virginia. Second, we're going to really need new funding here. There's, as I mentioned, that gap between the role the Army Corps of Engineers used to fill for the entire wetlands program, and now they're just covering a small part of it, and the state is going to be covering the rest. So we don't have positions that are prepared to do these wetlands delineations or review the applications coming in from developers. So we're going to need to allocate money to hire and train folks with DEQ to do this work. Third, we're going to have to ensure that this no net loss approach to wetlands protection is maintained. As I mentioned, we're going to lose wetlands from sea level rise already at a pretty alarming rate. So ensuring we don't also lose it to development and fill is all the more important and push forward because of that. And this is a little bit like number two, but we have already seen that from conversations that we thought were successful with DEQ, that there seems to be a little misinterpretation and a suggestion currently to move the entire wetlands program to the state, which will cost much more than having the feds cover the federal piece and the state cover the state piece. And we're going to need to build in opportunities here for a review of third-party delineations, meaning when the developer goes out there and says, oh, there are no wetlands on this property, we don't need any permits, we're not just going to take them at their word. Those are going to need to be reviewed by a professional who actually understands these definitions and the definition of the state, and ensuring that those are consistent and upheld. So we have a lot of challenges ahead of us on this issue, and happy to answer questions along with Mary.
All right. I appreciate Betsy and Mary-Carson being on here, and all of our other speakers today. Don't have any questions for y'all right now. I guess you just did such a good job answering everything. I do want to point out that this education work will continue, and Adriana is going to tell you a little bit more about that. This isn't the one and done, but this is just focus on our water chapter with its many sub-chapters. And with that, the work has just begun on this. So we've got it on paper. We've got some education webinars here, but we need to get out there and talk to legislators, incumbents, and those to come. We need to talk to voters. We need to talk to everyone in Virginia to whom this these issues are important. That's just about everybody. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and hang on while Andriana tells you about all the good stuff ahead.
Thank you so much for that, Pat. And I put everything I will be talking about in the chat as well. The first item being that everything with the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, a link in chat. Secondly, if you'd like to register for the other sessions, haven't already, or you want to share the other sessions that cover our 4 other issue areas in our network, then you can please share with them the Engage link. The third item is our General Assembly preview. It was a save the date for Saturday, December 2nd, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And these are our regional watch parties across Virginia to help prepare for the General Assembly process at the start of next year. And then finally, speaking of preparing for next year, make sure to bookmark our General Assembly Advocacy Guide to see our upcoming events and actions. We'll be updating in real time, our General Assembly 101 training video, an overview of Virginia's legislative session, and FAQs about Virginia's General Assembly process. So with that, we have ended our first session in our Common Agenda education series. Thank you so much for joining this webinar, and I hope to see you all at the next one.